What's up guys, this is Aaron Brewer, owner of Basileia Video, and I'm coming at you guys today with a tutorial. A lot of times people in photography and videography have wanted blurry backgrounds and clear foregrounds. People use the iPhone's portrait mode to achieve that effect, but it really boils down to one simple thing, and that's the aperture of the camera lens. Aperture actually has nothing to do with the camera itself. It's the rings inside of a camera lens that let in light to the sensor. So for example, I have a vintage lens right here actually, so it is a little dirty. It's got some dust on it, so we're just gonna ignore that. But nonetheless, this is the vintage lens that I used when I did a lot of my photography stuff. I love the look of vintage lenses, especially when you're taking pictures. I think it gives a really interesting feel, and the flares are beautiful in my opinion. All that aside, on higher grade cinema lenses and on vintage lenses, the aperture is controlled on the lens itself. But when you're dealing with most consumer cameras and most consumer lenses, you control the aperture through the camera body itself. But for the sake of this video, I wanted to use a vintage lens because it's easier to demonstrate what aperture is when you can control it directly on the lens. So the aperture ring is this bottom ring right here with all of those numbers along it, those white numbers. When I open and close the aperture ring, the aperture inside of the lens opens and closes. So as you can see, the aperture, or the iris of the lens, is made up of the rings on the inside that open and close to let light through the lens to the camera sensor. Wide open, closed off, wide open. Think about it like the human eye. The human eye has the pupil and the iris, and when you step out in a bright sunny day, the iris of your eye closes off to let less light hit your retina so that you don't go blind. But when you step inside into a darker environment, your eye opens up. It dilates so that you can let more light into your eye. The same exact thing works for a camera lens. The camera and the camera lens are imperfect replications of the human eye, so it makes sense that the iris of the camera lens would be quite similar to the iris of the human eye. In measuring aperture, the lower numbers represent a wider opening and the higher numbers represent a smaller opening. And those numbers are typically measured in f-stops on photographic cameras or smaller consumer cameras. When you start getting into cinema lenses and things like that, you get into t-stops or transmission stops, but that is not what we're going to talk about today. So F actually comes from the term foot candles, which is this really old, weird way of describing exposure, saying that you need a certain amount of candles to get a certain amount of correct exposure and all that stuff. But basically what you need to understand is that the higher the number is, the less light reaching the sensor. The lower the number is, the more light reaching the sensor. If I close off the aperture, then very little light is hitting the sensor, so you can barely see me. But if I open up the aperture, then I'm overexposed and I'm wider than I've ever been before. So it's really important to get correct exposure for your image so that people can see what it is you're trying to show them. But another thing that aperture can control is how blurry your background is, or the depth of field in your image. Depth of field is, simply put, how much of your image is in focus. So if you have a wide or long depth of field, then most of your image will be in focus, right? It'll be sharp, it'll be clear. However, if you have a shallow depth of field, then that means that very little of your image will be in focus and the rest will be blurry. A lot of times people want this effect for portraits or for close-up photography. They want to have a clear foreground and a blurry background. There's honestly a lot of light physics that goes into why that phenomenon occurs, but I'm not going to explain that in this video. If you want to hear about it, then I'd be happy to share it because I think it's kind of interesting. If you'd like to see that video, then shoot me a message in the comments and I'd be happy to explain light physics. Exposure and depth of field are really the two main things that you need to understand if you want to know how aperture can work for you and your videos. That's pretty much the basics right there when it comes to aperture. However, if you're in the Virginia area, I would love to invite you to a live workshop that I will be teaching on masterful video production. It is called the Ultimate Video Making Workshop. very creative name. I came up with it myself. Basically, it's a live workshop where I will go in depth into video mechanics as well as creative storytelling as it pertains to your business or your YouTube channel or just creating videos for your family at home. Now, this workshop is being held at the end of January on February 21st and 22nd. The one on Saturday, February 22nd is the 5-hour masterclass where we'll have hands-on activities to practice the skills that we learned. There will be handouts, openings for questions, all the things that you want. This light thing is insane, so you're gonna have to forgive me for that. I can't control the weather. On Friday, February 21st, we're going over the basics in a 1-hour workshop. You'll have handouts on equipment that you can use on any budget, and I will teach you the basics that you can implement right then and there to start creating amazing videos. If you don't think that you're equipped at the end of these workshops, then I have a double money back guarantee. I am that confident that these workshops are going to be life-changing for you. So if you're in the Virginia area, then I highly recommend you checking it out and attending. And just for you guys that are watching this video right now, I have a 15% off discount code if you click the link in the description of this video. I hope to see you guys there, and until then, be awesome and do it for the kingdom. Bye guys.